Hi, and welcome to the Delivery Note podcast, brought to you by Parcel and Postal Technology International. I'm Hazel King, and in this podcast series, we'll be talking about the hottest topics, latest trends, and the biggest challenges affecting the parcel, postal, and logistics sector. In this episode, I'm joined by Rob Carlisle to talk about Amazon's drone delivery service in the UK. We discuss whether this is really a viable option for last mile delivery, the challenges of operating drones in this sector, and what the final mile might look like in 2036. Hello, and welcome to the Delivery Note podcast. I'm Hazel King. And today I'm joined by Rob Carlisle, Head of Logistics from operations consultancy Argon Co. Good morning, Rob.
Hi, Hazel. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. How are you?
Very good, thank you.
Do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Argon Co?
Yeah. So, I'm Rob. Been with Argon about 10 years or so now. As you said, we do operations and supply chain consulting. Prior to that, I did 6 years in third-party logistics and in food retail. So I had some operational experience before into the world of consulting.
Perfect. Excellent. So thanks for joining the first episode of the new podcast. And today it's a good one. We're going to be talking about last mile drones and whether they're a viable alternative for last mile delivery or just a gimmick. And the reason this has come up is a few months ago, Amazon launched their UK drone delivery service in Darlington, and it garnered some interest from the BBC about the option. So let's start there. Do you think there's demand for it, or do you think it's just a gimmick?
I think it's a bit of both. I think there is genuine demand for this, but I suspect it's narrower than the headline suggests. It sounds great, the kind of mental image of drones delivering your products into your back garden, that's great, but I think they're after a particular niche for drone delivery. I don't think you're going to have your weekly groceries delivered 3 times a week by drones.
No.
They're after a particular segment of products, a particular service need. So I think it's not a gimmick. It is real, but it's a bit narrower than the headlines maybe suggest.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you there, actually. They have had some success in the US, expanding across a few different cities in Texas, Arizona, Michigan, Florida and Kansas. So do you think the US market is a better choice for Amazon with drone delivery than the UK, and why might that be?
I think so broadly, but even within the US it'll vary. So I think one of the challenges we've got is population density. So this is likely to be much more attractive in rural areas or for longer range deliveries, for harder to reach communities. It's difficult to see this being widely adopted in central London. Equally the same will be true in the US. It's difficult to see this happening, in Fifth Avenue in New York, for example. But in some of the more rural, more suburban areas where there's a bit more space, things are a bit more spread out. I think there could be demand for it.
And I suppose safety concerns as well in those sort of really densely urban populated areas.
Absolutely.
An issue.
There's lots of people around. There's lots of air traffic already. The regulators like the Civil Aviation Authority will be a bit nervous around this. They'll put some restrictions around it. You can only use them at certain times and around certain areas. They have to be visible to air traffic control, various things like that. But just the idea of drones at scale interacting with lots and lots of people in densely populated environments, that's a bit tricky to imagine.
Terrifies me, actually, if I'm honest with you. There was a recent study, actually, that said that the last mile delivery market is projected to grow quite substantially, actually, 1.82 billion in 2024 to 10.77 billion dollars, that is, in 2033. So do you think that is feasible? Can you see how the market could grow? Yeah,
definitely. But I would maybe split it that there will be demand for sort of final mile parcels, right? Things like Amazon, traditional e-commerce retailers, there will be demand for that. But if you put yourselves in the shoes of the average consumer, it's not just about speed. You want your parcels to be delivered together. You don't want multiple deliveries on the same day. So kind of consolidating orders is really important. Yes, speed is important, but you want to be in for the delivery, generally speaking, or you want to have some assurance that it's going to be delivered correctly. So having something in 20 minutes is good, but actually having fewer, bigger orders together at a time that really suits you is really important as well. So it's not just speed.
And at the moment, the drone's capacity as well, I think it's 2 kilos, something like that. So as you say, it's only going to be small. Can you see the drones getting bigger, having a bigger payload, or in this sort of commercial last mile?
I think so, yes. I think demand for it will grow. There'll be things like you might want I don't know, what's a really top example? Maybe you might want a phone charger delivered within 20 minutes, right? Because you can't find it and your phone's going to die and we use our phones for so much stuff. So having a really, really quick delivery for something like that would be great. Are you going to need it to top up washing up liquid? Probably not. You just don't need something to be delivered that quickly for things like that. So I think final mile delivery is a definite market for it. But again, we're in a bit of a niche. It's got to be small, it's got to be urgent, and it's got to be really time sensitive. So that could be medicines, that could be life-saving equipment, definite demand for that. But the market for that is not as big as full scale consumer retail. Other thing I think is there's a lot of demand for drones in use to access certain things in rural areas that isn't necessarily just final mile delivery. So you think about things like infrastructure inspection. If you're inspecting the top of a wind turbine, for example, right? That requires rope access teams. They're very expensive. There's obviously it's quite a risky occupation. So using drones for things like that, I can see a lot of demand for inspecting power lines, inspecting railway lines. So that's not quite final mile delivery in the true sense, but I think that's where you could expect to see a lot of drone activity. And that's where I think the regulator will look to try and push more stuff towards that. Because again, it's in rural environments, it's spread out, it's not typically in densely populated urban environments.
Yeah.
So I see a big demand for that, and that'll definitely grow. But I think that the market for final mile retail is a bit more limited for it.
Yeah, I agree. I can't see myself actually using it. I think, I live half a mile from the supermarket and just not that lazy. But
that's the thing, right? For this to be successful at scale, it needs to be something that is so urgent that you can't get within, half a mile walk to Sainsbury's local or a co-op or whatever else. And it needs to be, you're after quite a niche. The kind of Venn diagram of stuff that this really fits and you truly need a drone for is quite small.
Yeah. Although Royal Mail have had some success with it using in the Orkney Islands up at, remote Scottish areas as well. And obviously we talked briefly about medical supply and disaster relief delivery as well. I think that's probably a market I can see more growth in. So those figures, perhaps where it said last mile delivery drones are going to grow to 10 billion. I think that's a bit pie in the sky, in my opinion. But I think the medical and the disaster relief markets are probably a viable option.
Definitely. And again, it talks to that typically not urban environments, super urgent, time critical medicine. Yeah, it's a perfect use case for that. So I see drone capacity and drone payload increasing to support that. And I guess there's a situation in Russia and Ukraine at the moment. There's extensive drone usage. You see drone technology evolving extremely quickly. Huge developments in speed and payload and tracking and all those sort of things. So albeit there's terrible events out there, that will have as war often does, it kind of has some sort of civilian development. I hesitate to use the word benefits, but kind of all the developments that are going on out there, that will then come into civilian drone usage. So I expect to see the kind of capability of those drones really, really improving.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I suppose from a sustainability point of view, we've talked about they're not being hugely viable in urban environments, but vans getting around in urban environments often doesn't feel like it's viable too. Yeah. Is there a sustainability argument to be made for using drone delivery, moving to this more autonomous kind of in the sky system rather than, blocking up the road networks? The UK especially awful for it.
I think so. Drones are typically battery powered, typically rechargeable. They're generally speaking, fairly quiet, albeit you sort of have to get used to that, the kind of hum of the drone noise. So I think yes, but I expect actually delivery services to adopt a bit of a hybrid model where drone is kind of one of the delivery channels that they use, along with vans, along with lockers, along with out-of-home delivery points, lots of other methods. So I see it kind of being part of the delivery ecosystem, but I don't see it replacing vans and trucks sort of at scale.
No.
Certainly not yet.
No.
Decades down the line perhaps.
I think it's that not yet, isn't it? As we know with this industry, it's very innovative and changing all the time. So on to that point of it being a hybrid choice, with other options. If the drone delivery system was to take off, how do you think it could be successfully integrated in existing hub and spoke and micro fulfillment? There must be charging points needed for them, landing points, takeoff points. How do you see the infrastructure evolving if drones were to take off? Excuse the pun.
Yeah. So I think drones are naturally going to have to take off from a hub of some sort. So in the Amazon example, they're using the kind of big Darlington hub that they've got there, and they're kind of based in and around that hub. In the Royal Mail example, they're again in and around a sorting centre or a sort of delivery point. So they're always going to need a base of sorts to come back to, whether that has to be the big sort of huge industrial headquarter type base or more of a kind of outpost. So I think to your point around recharging, around storage, around capacity, around all those things, they're going to have somewhere to be based at rather than sort of completely scattered across the country.
And do you foresee any sort of security issues around, I hate to say it, but theft of drones? They're obviously an expensive piece of kit, and if they're landing in somebody's front garden and then attractive to them, do you think there's extra security issues around it?
I think potentially I would expect the drones to be equipped with pretty high definition cameras because they'll want to have those cameras there to ensure proof of delivery. They'll like to take screenshots, sort of photos of where they've landed. They might want confirmation that the occupant or the resident has come out to the drone to meet the delivery. So I expect there'll be some safeguards around that. These things will be very heavily tracked, so you'll know to the square inch of someone's garden where it's gone to. So will there be some risk around it a little bit? Yeah, I guess we'll have to see on that. But it could be. I'd say that they are expensive, albeit, again, to my earlier point, that drone technologies are advancing really quickly. These things are becoming much cheaper to make. But yeah, do I see some opportune thefts? Possibly.
Well, I suppose you could say that about a delivery van, right? If it's left with the keys in the ignition. Not that I'm assuming people are stealing things. And then we've touched on it a little bit, but what do you think are the biggest regulatory barriers around introducing drones into final mile delivery?
Yes, I think we can split this two ways. I think there is a kind of governmental regulatory obstacle. The Civil Aviation Authority will have something to say about it for sure. There's regulations around kind of beyond visual line of sight approval. So literally, if you cannot see the drone anymore, there's various regulations that have to be adhered to, and that prevents kind of average man in the street sort of piloting a drone miles and miles offshore. There's regulations where you have to be within line of sight of it. I think there'll be some safety concerns, there'll be airspace regulation, there'll be some noise, there'll be some privacy things. I think there'll be a lot of kind of literal government regulations around that side of things. But I think as well there's a bit of sort of citizen sort of soft approval of, if we get to a stage as members of society where we're really comfortable with it, then I suspect the regulators will likely follow that. If there's a lot of community concern about noise, about safety, about all these legitimate concerns, then I suspect the regulators will likely try and side with civilians and sort of echo their concerns rather than just wave it through. So I think both are there. If we as citizens, completely adopt this technology and we see it as being indispensable, I would expect regulators to make it easier to adopt.
And I suppose really another question I have is, why do you think Amazon have bothered? They have such a big network already. They are obviously able to deliver same day and next day, and they're synonymous with the ability to deliver as and when any consumer wishes. So what's the point?
I think there's definitely a marketing angle to it. It gets headlines on BBC, but Amazon has a drone delivery network. It grabs our attention. That's one of the reasons we're talking about it here. But also Amazon's a very innovative company. They're at the forefront of this technology. They adopted electric vans really early on. They've obviously had automation in their distribution centres for quite a while. They are a very innovative company, and this is kind of one of the ways in which they prove it. I suspect they want to have kind of first mover advantage in this space as well. So if this does take off, they have a somewhat pre-built network and sort of tried and trusted technology that will be there before the likes of DHL, UPS or FedEx have adopted it. Even though it's a copycat industry, if it works with one player, the others will be following very quickly.
And I suppose the cynic in me suggests that Amazon is big enough and brave enough to fail as well. If it doesn't work, they will use it as a case point that, well, we've tried to be innovative and it hasn't worked, but they don't mind failing, do you think?
Yeah, indeed. But I guess, one of the things we've seen with Amazon Web Services and Amazon Supply Chain Services, things like that, is even if it doesn't work directly for Amazon, there is a potential way for them to monetize the technology and the innovation to use other things. So even if you're not delivering next day, in day products that are owned and delivered by Amazon, you could see a world where Amazon drones are leased or are lent out to other retailers or to other operations who need it. So we talked about the Royal Mail example. If you were a big pharmacy chain and you needed to deliver to your customers, to your patients in rural environments, and Amazon had a drone service available, you could potentially lease that, buy that technology in pretty quickly, even if not in use directly for the Amazon retail business.
Yeah, they are so innovative. I mean, they're an amazing company. And so I suppose that brings me to my last point then. If drones were included, what does the ideal last mile delivery network look like in 10 years' time?
I think it is that it's going to be a real hybrid model. So consumer delivery preferences have changed really quickly, even in the last 5 or 6 years. So think about pre-COVID, for example, people were not at home anywhere near as much as they are now. So at the moment, actually, home delivery is fairly convenient because you're typically at your desk working at home. So actually having fewer consolidated deliveries works really well at the moment. We're seeing huge growth in things like out-of-home delivery points, the likes of secure lockers and click and collect and those sort of channels. So I see one of the key things being this is a channel that is available for delivery, but I don't see it being the only one. It'll be a mix of home delivery, of vans, of cargo bikes, out-of-home lockers, things like that. I suspect it'll be really mixed. So having this as in the armoury as such as a delivery method is great, but having that kind of really balanced service approach is key.
I think one thing that we know is that it never will be boring in this industry.
For sure.
It evolves all of the time. Have I answered the question of is it a gimmick or is it a viable option? I think the answer probably is a bit of both, as you said at the top.
Yeah, and I would say this as a consultant, wouldn't I? But ask me again in 2 years. I suspect the answer will have changed a bit.
Oh, well, we'll have to have you back and see for sure. Thank you so much, Rob. Really appreciate it. Thanks for listening today, and don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you find your podcasts. Join us next time on the Delivery Note podcast for more insightful discussions on the parcel, postal and logistics sector.